We are a peaceful people. Struggle is we struggle, and we don't look for trouble. Just ask around. But when outside faces from foreign places talk about taking over,
Thank you, honorable members. Please be seated. I now call on the Honorable Minister of Parliamentary Affairs and Governance, the Honorable Member, Ms. Gail Teixeira, to make her contribution. Minister, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is March the 1st, 2021. A year ago, this day, all parties were preparing for the March 2nd elections. Little did we know then it would take us 5 months to have the genuine results of those elections declared. Tomorrow will mark a year since those elections were held. Mr. Speaker, we have been regaled by the APNU with all sorts of small stuff. But the issue is that what the PNC AFC has to live with for the rest of its existence is a legacy that left our country, a legacy of a party that was willing to do anything and everything to stay in power, regardless of the will of the people of our country. They can talk about all sorts of small stuff. Some may have merit in terms of mistakes we made in the past or weaknesses we had. But not any government, even Burnham's government, went to the extent to which the APNU, PNC, AFC went in 2020. None. And in fact, the legacy of the left us is not just Guyana. The legacy they have left us as the people of Guyana is a legacy that is known across the world now. We're the only country in the whole world, in the democratic world, that had to wait 5 months and struggle day by day for 5 months to be able to have the will of the people respected and declared. I mean, I'll just go back a bit because some people are a bit younger than I am. But I lived through the 70s when we as a people had to live with the fact, Mr. Speaker, and you were in my generation, I believe, that Jonestown, 900 people were massacred on our soil. And it was the highest civilian massacre in the world, in a non-war situation in the world, until September 11th, the plane going into the Twin Towers. That was our legacy. Is this the legacy always that when the PNC is in power, we have to live with these global legacies that stain us as a people? How often we've had to say when we go abroad, Guyana, they say, Jonestown. Now they will say Guyana, country in which you all had to wait for 5 months. Mr. Speaker, and they come to us with crocodile tears in this parliament about their righteousness, and it is galling because whatever they did, right or wrong, good or bad, it has been overtaken and stained forever. What they did from the December 21st, 2018 no confidence motion right through to August the 2nd, 2020. It is not only the 5 months. We were dragged before the courts to be told arithmetically what we all knew, that 33 is the majority of 65. How disgraceful. And yet they don't hang their heads in shame. they come here and pretend to be righteous. They have come here with jaundiced eyes. Their eyes are jaundiced because everything they see in is race. They cannot look at our nation and the kaleidoscope of our nation and how beautiful we are in our distinct differences, culturally, ethnically, religiously, geographically. They come here with jaundiced eyes and deduce everything. The common denominator is race. And how can you have a country being run by a party like that? That's why they failed. That's why they're on the other side. They did not comprehend that as Guyanese, we're many different colors and combinations. And we have our differences and we have our ethnic insecurities, but we still love our country. We still want to be here. We still want to make this our home. And they did not understand that Afro-Guyanese, Indo-Guyanese, mixed Guyanese, Portuguese Guyanese, Chinese Guyanese, Amerindian want this as their home. They didn't want to live in this situation where they discriminated against people based on color, sometimes religion, and the political affiliation. And yet they come here and talk a whole set of nonsense. Mr. Speaker, you know the problem. Remember, you and I have been in Parliament for a while, and we know the old bat and ball trick. Every time the PNC, whether it was 92 to 97, 97 to 2001, 2001 to 2006, 2006 to 11, 2012 to 2015, bad players. Every time they were losing a discussion, throw down your bat and ball and walk. Poor losers. That is in your DNA, you're poor losers. You try to hijack an election, thwart the will of the people of this country who voted on election day in a peaceful elections and gave their mandate to the People's Progressive Party Civic. And the goal of it all is that despite the results, you did everything, every day from March the 5th right to August 2nd to make sure that you remained in power regardless of the will of the people. But the point is, Mr. Speaker, democracy prevailed. This new nascent democracy of ours that started in 1992 with the first free and fair elections, it's a baby democracy. We don't have 300 years of democracy after us like the Americans. We don't have hundreds of years of democracy after us like the British. But what we do have is our guts to recognize how we had to fight for this democracy. And we've had to fight for it again to protect it and preserve it in that period between December 2018 and August 2020. Democracy is now enshrined, and it is something that every citizen of this country recognizes. It's their duty to protect and defend, every citizen. But you know, Mr. Speaker, in the whole thing we've been listening to for the last 4 days, there's no mea culpa. There's no mea culpa. There's no responsibility for anything they did. They blame everything on somebody else. As a government and a former government, they take responsibility for nothing. And that is sad. I mean, it doesn't bother me because I know that won't help them to win elections again. But they did, we in the PPP said, we recognized some of our weaknesses and that we would correct them. And we did. And we came back stronger and more united than ever before. And the people recognize that. Mr. Speaker, I want to deal with an illusion that exists in this parliament. There's an illusion that there's something called the APNU-AFC coalition. The problem, Mr. Speaker, it no longer exists. WPA is gone. The shell of TUF gone, or that never was in the first place. The Guyana Action Party never was, but it was part of the 2011. Coalition for Transformation, which Annette Ferguson headed, is gone. It was a PNC front in the first place. Justice for All, gone. Scott's party, which I can never remember the name, please forgive me, I can't remember the name of the party, made up of 3 people, gone. What are we left with? The bare bones. The bare bones goes back to the DNA of the PNC. The PNC and AFC. And both are shells of their former days. So there's no APNU coalition in this house. What you have is a PNC-AFC marriage. That's what you have. You know, a marriage of convenience, who knows? But a marriage. Mr. Speaker, this PNC-AFC coalition crossed the Rubicon. You know, when Caesar crossed the Rubicon, he never returned, never crossed back. He was defeated. It is a passage to no return. And so when the PNC crossed the Rubicon, when they refused to comply with the Constitution and the no confidence motion and call elections by March 21st, 2019, they were on the path to destruction and defeat. And so said, so done. Mr. Speaker, the oppression of the PNC-AFC in government, 200 taxes, promises not delivered in the 5 years, promises they'd made in the first 100 days. The public servants were to get 20% increase in salary. Never happened. They fooled the public service union and the teachers union who backed them in the 2015 elections that manna was going to fall from heaven. They were going to get 20%. Well, they never did. And the teachers had to go and strike in November 2017 to try to get what little bit they got out of the government. But then it was broken promises to all, including to the poor and vulnerable, who they promised that they would have all these increases in the allowances, in the old age pension, etc. What did they deliver? What did they deliver? An increase in tax collection of 225 billion as a result of the new taxes, fees and licenses going up. And as my colleague Hugh Todd said, the policies of the coalition were politically, socially, and economic extractive. Extractive. Perfect description. Meaning, for me, in my interpretation of my colleague's words, is that you took all that you could. You sucked the country of its oxygen. People were suffocating under your leadership. And you never recognized it. You never saw it. You refused to believe it. Mr. Speaker, fundamentally, you know, there is a philosophical difference between the PPPC and the PNC-AFC. And it is a governance issue. What is the governance issue? How is power acquired and on whose behalf is it used? Who are the beneficiaries? That's what governance is about. On whose behalf are you ruling? Who are the beneficiaries? You're judged by your governance structures and your philosophy. Or as the APNU-AFC was doing, they were governing for the few at the top, for the elite and their friends and their cronies, and many of the long-time supporters of the PNC who felt it was Awidi's time. We first time. It's time to get back. Do you remember those things? The issue of the people and the government is a contract that is sacred. It is fundamental and it is based on our Constitution. There are other philosophical differences between us. We have a pro-poor, pro-growth approach to development, and that's what we have started with in '92, and we've continued right to now. It is always, when you look at the PPPC budgets, there's a large section to do with pro-poor, and a large section to do with pro-growth in order to expand the economy, to allow for the growth of businesses and for the betterment of all of our people. And what is the PNC-AFC philosophy? Their philosophy to development is tax-driven. Tax the people, let them pay more, rather than investment, expansion, diversification. And so, fundamentally, their philosophy is anti-people. It is anti-people and anti-growth. Their economic model is one that used taxation as a means to create revenue. In fact, in 2018, as Raman McRae in his annual budget focus said, government being in the business of profit as a means unto itself. This is his comment on the 2018 budget. But governments philosophically are not in the business of profit. Governments are enablers and facilitators. And that's what the PPC is now. We are the enablers and the facilitators to make sure that our people are able to reach the heights that they're supposed to have, to get the opportunities to do that, to get the support of the government and whatever goods and services we offer in order to be able to reach that. You know, they talked about inclusion and social cohesion until everybody wanted to barf when they heard those words because it was so disconnected to reality. Inclusion? Where was that? They talk about firing people. They fired thousands of people. And so I'll come back to that. But they fired thousands of people. In the public service, they fired over 2,000 people. They fired 1,972 Amerindian community service officers. The ethnic group that had the largest persons who were dismissed within the first month of the PNC coming to power. Why was there vengeance against the Amerindians? Inexplicable. Because they chose to vote a particular way that they didn't agree with? But Mr. Speaker, there are other crimes and there are other philosophies. You were invisible. You were inaccessible. You were divorced from the people, relying on expensive spin doctors, both in Guyana and beyond, to churn out race and division, to churn out fake news, and to weave a narrative that fooled yourselves. You actually fooled yourselves. But no one else was fooled. You claimed achievements which no one could find. You claimed gifts that weren't existing. You made people who were not politically and ethnically correct feel like second-class citizens in our own country of birth. You made us feel as if we were second-class citizens in the nation of our birth, where our navel string is buried, and you come here and preach righteousness, and that you are so holier than thou. We were all made to feel that we were not worthy of being in Guyana. You treated us as second-class citizens. You took away the hope of people in the future. You undermined trust and confidence. People didn't know how they were going to make it. Not only the 7,000 sugar workers lost their job and the 1,972 Amerindian community service officers, nor the 2,000 odd public servants, but there were also 30,000 jobs were lost because of the wrong policies and priorities of your government. And yet, you remained oblivious and insensitive to this all. This is your shame. This is your legacy. We don't have to defend you. You have to apologize to the people for what you did to them.
No.
You saw our cultural, as I said, ethnic, religious diversity and linguistic diversity was something that was and still is being used by you, by the APNU, PNCFC, to divide instead of to reconcile and build. You were vindictive and heartless, and you still are being vindictive and heartless. Mr. Speaker, let's do some maths, because I know the APNU, AFC, PNC are not good at maths. They don't seem to like maths very much. But let's do some translation. Let's do some translation. And let me confess, I'm not very good at maths either. But I do know arithmetic. So let's go back. The 1,972 Amerindian community service officers who were terminated, they had 10,000 dependents, which meant by the salary being withdrawn from them from August 2015, $700 million was removed from the village economies in the interior. This increased poverty. This increased the poverty exponentially in these areas. But what did you give back in return? Did it bother you? You gave back boats, buses, bicycles, expandable sandals, buses that broke down after a few mornings, boats that didn't work. And a very small percentage of people. You gave these tokens, like when white man came to our countries as colonizers, they gave tokens to the natives. You gave tokens to the natives in our country. You gave tokens to the Amerindian people of our country. Here's a couple buses, here's a couple boats. Be grateful. It is APNU PNC AFC in government. Shockingly, $700 million removed from the economy. That is why the Amerindian villages were having trouble. including not dealing with the community development plans, that money they had applied for before 2015 was approved in the Norway agreement, and yet you didn't release that money. You released that money in little tranches as if it was when you wanted a little photograph in the newspapers and get notoriety. But you know, you didn't get it. You just didn't get it. People were suffering as a result of one decision you took, and that you didn't get it. You treated 7,000 sugar workers as collateral damage. And in this house, even more recently, the whole sugar industry was called bloodsuckers of the nation. But yet, those 7,000 workers had families. And if an average of 5 persons in a sugar worker's home, 35,000 people were immediately impacted by this. The impact on the wider community, it has been calculated to be 1/4 of the Guyanese population was affected. And yet, you did nothing. Nothing. You were asked to give relief to the sugar workers who lost their jobs, and you did nothing. You just didn't get it. You just didn't get it. 30,000 people lost their jobs. Why? Your taxation, all the other wrong priorities you had, business closed down, people were, and this is before COVID. This is before COVID. And yet, you come here to this house and talk about bauxite, when what happened to bauxite is your fault. You did it. And yet, you're so delusional that you don't even recognize when you were in government. But you know, 30,000 people lost their jobs. No help, no assistance, no relief. You just didn't get it. Every week in the official gazette was full of bank sales of motorbikes, minibuses, houses, farming equipment, combines, because the people couldn't pay their loans. And still, you didn't get it. You didn't get it. You continue to accumulate. You continue to accumulate. The PNC, AFC continue to accumulate land. You had this land grabbing going on, and all sorts of other nefarious arrangements which are under investigation now. Mr. Speaker, in 2018, the Ministry of Health boasted it had the biggest budget. In fact, in the 5 years, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Health had over $105 billion. Yet, severe and constant shortages of essential drugs and medical supplies were across the country. Immunization fell because of lack of vaccines. Drugs for HIV/AIDS patients were unavailable. People had to go and buy if they had the money. And in many parts of the country, there's no place like a pharmacy to go buy anything. And yet, the monies were spent. $100 billion spent. And all your legacy you seem to talk about is $1 million. How disgraceful. It wasn't even government property that you spent over $1 billion on. Of taxpayers' money, by the way, not yours. You didn't get it. You just didn't get it. You were living so far in the clouds and thought that you were entitled, that you had transport to government, that you didn't have to worry about the minions below you, the working people, the farmers. You didn't have to pay attention to them. Taxes, the taxes that were brought in. It is calculated that approximately over $200,000 per annum was removed from every household in Guyana by the taxes you introduced. And you didn't get it. You didn't get it. 60% increase in the taxes between 2015 and 2019. $225 billion was taken from our people. And you wonder why people are having a hard time. You wonder why. And I don't think you wondered why. I don't think you cared to wonder why anything. But you didn't recognize that by the taxation you brought in and the consequences, if you tax farming implements, you will then have an increase in the cost of production. You will have then a cost of the products reaching the market. When you didn't remove the fuel cost until when the thing had dropped so far down, you were exposed. It caused increase in food costs. And in the 2018 midterm review, the Minister of Finance, Mr. Jordan, had to admit that the inflation had gone up because of the cost of living and the cost of production. Mr. Speaker, people, but if that were all, Mr. Speaker, if that were all, but there's more and there's more. It's like opening a Pandora's box, and out pumps all these issues, and the more you dig, the more you find. Mr. Speaker, the levels of corruption, transparency, issues of transparency and accountability were levels never seen
Honorable
in this country
Minister,
before.
we will have to withdraw corruption, right?
Scandals, Mr. Speaker, scandals. Scandals and scandamania. Scandamania in its heights in the 5 years, in their heights. Mr. Speaker, I'm not talking anecdotally. I'm not talking anecdotally. Go to the Auditor General's report, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. You will barf. You will barf when you read almost every single page. There's a scandal or inexplicable use of money. So, Mr. Speaker, while I'm not allowed to use the word corruption, you will have to find another word for corruption because it begins with a capital CORRUPTION.
Honorable Minister, please.
Mr. Speaker, the levels were so high of scandals that people, I'm just asking how to spell it, it's that it denied. You see, the issue of not only people filling their pockets and using taxpayers' money wrongly, it's what the impact was on the people. So by these scandals, people were denied better health care because of the $100 billion in health, of which the majority on the drug budget went through non-procurement, non-public tender arrangements. So, but yet the drugs weren't there. So people suffered. These scandals cost the ordinary people every single day of their lives. You took money out of their pockets and then you didn't give them back what they needed. Look, let's go to housing. You didn't like our housing program. You threw it out the window. You created duplexes after quite a while, and there are, again, questions and scandals in relation to that. But you never changed the law so that people could borrow money from the bank in order to buy a duplex. This is what you have short horizons. But you didn't recognize that. Infrastructure, for every time you didn't do a road, a bridge, you cost. You cost the bus people, the taxi people, the cars, because those had to be repaired more often. You then remove the tires coming in, the used tires, and therefore taxi men had to pay from $6,000 for a tire to $18,000 to a tire. Where do you think that money was coming from for ordinary people? It's coming out of making decisions. Mr. Speaker, some of you men, some of the men in this house over there, not all, but some of the men, I try to be careful, never go into a market or a supermarket. They have other people do that for you. However, Mr. Speaker, it was sad to see as you went through the 5 years, people started buying less and less. Less chicken, less fish, more rice, more chow mein. They made decisions with what money they had available. And you must have known this. And yet you were oblivious. Look at your misuse of funds to do with infrastructure cost everybody who was transporting money, because you had to pay more to get to where you had to go. You cost the country in jobs. By having the housing program become whittled down to almost 2,000 a year, that much, it meant that 5,000 workers in construction in the housing sector lost their jobs. Manufacturers who were producing goods for the construction industry were losing markets as well. You also decided that, the tender processes are something you could, dispense with. And so what you did, you had contractors of this country unable to get work for 5 years, whether they were of a particular composition or how they look or how you thought they looked. 5 years, thousands of contractors couldn't get work in this country. And now that we've gone back, public tender, opening, it's in the newspapers, it's all over the place. We have an upsurge in the tendering and the companies coming forward, small, medium, and large, to tender for government works. And you know what that will do? You know what that will do? It'll create jobs. Because as more work is created, you hire more people. But you're so myopic, so short-sighted, that you didn't recognize that there are these ripple effects. Ripple effects. And then we have the other areas, what is called sustainable livelihood SLED. I can't remember the other part of it. Sustainable livelihood. The report that came out, a good program, a program that means well. But what did you use it for? You used it to give rewards to the boys, to your activists. And you left out meaningfully deserving people who needed that support with SLED. And of course, that is another issue under investigation. Even the COVID relief that you claim that you were involved in, your 50,000 voucher for people to get groceries. Why was it that the center to apply in Georgetown was at the Green Mansion opposite the Cultural Center? Why was it that Guyanese had to go and apply at the Burnham Museum in the greenhouse, where you all know what I'm talking about, opposite the Cultural Center, to apply for the food vouchers? And why is it that only a few people got it?
To continue, you need to apply for an extension.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, we request an extension of 5 minutes. Would honourable member to continue?
Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister. Honorable Minister of Governance, you may continue to conclude.
These scandals, Mr. Speaker, denied our people what was rightfully theirs: access to goods and services, access to a better life. And then, of course, you have the non-inclusion of people in the jobs, appointments, access to housing, water, and safety nets. The denial of exclusion for civil society and the parliamentary opposition. Non-inclusion, non-inclusion. In fact, what you were and the PNC was exclusionary. Because there's a level of control freakism that we observed in the 5 years, a level of control freakism, that if you weren't on their side, you were of no worth, and therefore is to be ignored. I leave my colleague, Anil Nandalal, to talk about the constitution violations, except to say one thing. Another of your legacies is that no other government in this country, from independence to now, has been found to have committed so much violations of the Constitution by the judiciary of Guyana and the Caribbean Court of Justice. No other government. Mr. Speaker, when my colleague Colin Crowell talks about having delivered 10,000 house lots in the last 3 months of 2020, do we realize how many jobs we've created with that? What hope we've created with that? The issue of people owning their house lot is priceless. Priceless in terms of their whole future, how they look at life, how they invest in this country, how they believe this is the place to be. But no, you dwindled it down to 2,000 and didn't even bother to do anything proper with it. Mr. Speaker, the issue of, Mr. Speaker, as I try to wind down, and there are many things. I've heard about the unions being quoted, but I have the quote from 2018, where the TUC and the FITUC both condemned the 2018 budget as being anti-people and anti-union. Mr. Speaker, since we've got into office, we have had the 2020 emergency budget, and that has set the stage, as we said then, to do emergency works with COVID and regards to our economy. And in 2021, we now commence implementing stage of expanding and diversifying the economy and repairing the damage caused by the APNU AFC's time in office. And we have to do hard work to rebuild our nation. We have to restore hope and trust and confidence in the future. And when you look at the programs that we have in our budget, and I hope some of you read it, because some of the things have been said in the parliament, clearly nobody read it. But in those few months we've been in office, 5.5 billion and more have been given out in the COVID relief. I just want to make a quick comment. Between March and August, in the COVID, not one mask was given out to the public. Mr. Speaker, as parliamentary opposition, I noticed Mrs. Hughes said we didn't join the task force. We're not joining their task force, Mr. Talkshop. We were doing 200,000 masks made in the midst of COVID by volunteers across in every single region of this country. Food hampers delivered to thousands and thousands of people with no political strings attached. And yet, you want us to be part of the task force? I don't think you really wanted us. But Mr. Speaker, when you look at the budget and the document here and the volumes, and if they've been going through it, where's the focus? Health, education, public works, housing and water, human services. And this is where we're talking about, in public works, creating the infrastructure for the expansion of the economy and the diversification of the economy. Agriculture, in terms of reversing what APNU AFC did by moving us in a monoculture direction with oil and gas only. We're reversing on that. And so the investment in agriculture is not to do with pineapple and bora, as someone was talking about today, but about really moving us in an agro-processing way to be more value-added and also expanded. Mr. Speaker, when you look at health and education, human services, housing and water, those are all in relation to improving the quality of life of our people, regardless of where they live, regardless of what class they are, regardless of what ethnic group they are, regardless of what religion, and regardless of what gender. Mr. Speaker, you, APNU AFC, you were the gods of small things. You were the gods of small things. You worried about arches and painting of buildings. The PPPC from August the 2nd, 2020 is focusing on the big issues, and the priority is to transform the economy by expanding and diversifying the economic base, improving, as I said, the quality of life, and reducing the geographic disparities that exist in our country. We have geographic disparities between the rural and the coastal and the interior. And we have to grapple with that. So, Mr. Speaker, thank you. I'd just like to say that 2021 is a plan for recovery, economic dynamism, and resilience. Did someone give me 5 minutes, by the way? Okay, I wasn't paying attention. And comrades and members of parliament, I suggest when you have your time and you get over all your hype, why don't you read pages 43 to 57 in the budget book?
You're going to have to stop now, Honorable Minister.
And 54 to 64. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Before I call on the next speaker, I noticed that someone just came in to the House and handed someone on the government side something. That person I didn't recognize as a parliament staff. And I want to say again that the sanctity of this House needs to be maintained. If you have your staff bringing things to you, please pass it to the persons who are entitled to walk around the house. And the next time I see that, I'll embarrass the person who is doing it. The Honorable Member and Attorney General, Minister of Legal Affairs, The Honorable Anil Nandlal. Honorable Minister, you may proceed with your contribution to this debate.
Mr. Speaker, the privilege is now mine to offer some remarks on the 2021 National Estimates and Expenditure and the budget speech of my brother, the distinguished Minister of Finance. I wish to offer to him and his staff my deepest felicitations on producing the largest budget ever in the history of our country. I have also had the opportunity to listen to my distinguished colleagues on the other side of the House. And Mr. Speaker, they have a problem. They have a problem which is theirs, created by them, which they have to shoulder. And it is one of credibility. It is one of credibility. The truth of the matter is, no matter what they say, how they say it, nobody in this country who knows them takes them seriously. So we heard the distinguished member, Ms. Cathy Hughes, lecture to us this morning. And guess what the front page of yesterday's newspaper says? Former APNU minister signed off millions in contract to her own company. Cathy Hughes' photograph adorn the front page of
The Honorable Member Cathy Hughes, Honorable
Member, of course, deeply honorable. Mr. Speaker, we heard from my friend, my learned friend, the Honorable Mr. Roysdale Ford. And how can one divorce Mr. Ford from his role during that 5 months period? The Guyanese people are an intelligent people. And they saw Mr. Ford lead that team that sought relentlessly to trample upon our Constitution, defeat the will of our people, and steal a government. The whole world saw that, and he lost repeatedly at the courts. We also saw him promise the PNC supporters that he will throw this government out of power by an election petition, and within 3 months of filing of the petition is dismissed. How can anyone take him seriously? And I suppose it is for that reason, Mr. Speaker, that this morning he came here and pretended to be an economist and regaled us with some statistics that nobody in this house have ever heard. I never knew we produced so much bora, squash, and pineapples. He told us that our pineapples production, bora production, was greater than rice. Well, two Saijan and same farmers called me, they said they left out. They feel left out because he didn't mention them. Mr. Speaker, this honorable member is highly inexperienced. And he must know that we are intelligent people in this house. He came here with a string of statistics, did not cite a source from where he collected them, and regaled us about sectors that we don't even know exist in this country at that level, telling us that we are planting more cassava and yam than rice and sugar. What shame, Mr. Speaker. And then, Mr. Speaker, he spent a lot of time speaking on a particular transaction on the east coast of Demerara in relation to a NISIL sale of land to Mr. Eddie Boyer. What he did not say is that that land in question was advertised by public tender, and National Hardware applied pursuant to that process and won based upon a tendering public process. That part of the equation he omitted. And Mr. Speaker, I have walked here with all the transactions done by NISIL from 1993 to 2011, and he can read them if he wishes. They are all documented in this document, a publicly available document. It outlines every sale of public lands by NISIL, the process involved, where it was advertised, who bought, and at what price they bought. And even the competitive bids are recorded in this document. So Mr. Ford has no credibility whatsoever to question anybody on this side.
Honorable
The
Attorney
land-
General, if you don't want to say Honorable Mr. Ford, you could say Comrade Ford.
Mr. Speaker, the lands that are under review now by this administration, Mr. Speaker, are lands that were gifted away without any known public process whatsoever. That is the difference. And lands that were given not to the ordinary Guyanese, but to cronies on that side. That is why he said that we are witch hunting PNC supporters. It's not PNC supporters. They are friends and cronies of the PNC who benefited from public lands by virtue of private transactions never made public. And those, Mr. Speaker, those transactions we will continue to review, and where possible, we will take the requisite steps to restore those lands to the ownership of the people of this country. Mr. Speaker, 55 years after independence and 51 years after attaining Republican status, our country is now fortuitously poised for an unprecedented economic takeoff, which holds a certain potentiality of not only transforming our country itself, but transforming the lives of our people and indeed future generations in a manner never contemplated before. At this fundamental juncture, Mr. Speaker, Guyanese of every race and class must now make a choice. Will they come on board with our government, or will they continue to be allow themselves to be manipulated, misused, misled, and abused by an incompetent, irrelevant APNU AFC? Mr. Speaker, they come here to lecture to us on democracy and on constitutionality, but they think that the Guyanese people have forgotten that in 1968 they stole their rights to choose a government of their choice. In 1973 they rigged the elections. In 1977 they rigged the referendum. In 1980 they rigged the elections. In 1985 they rigged the elections. How can Guyanese forget that? And you coming to tell us now about democracy? Mr. Speaker, the honorable member, my distinguished friend and learned colleague, Mr. Kemraj Ramjatan, spoke about them to repay. How do you want us to build the country, Mr. Ramjatan, honorable member? You want us to throw a box? So we will borrow. We will borrow, but we will borrow in a manner that is prudent, manageable, and we will pay it back, as we have always done. As we have always done. Mr. Speaker, how can the members of this House and members of the public not recall that after 21 years or more in the political wilderness, they got a one-seat majority after the 2011 elections? And rather than use that one-seat majority after so many years in political wilderness to exact and extract more for the people of this country, they use that one-seat majority to slash constitutional agencies' budget, to strike down national transformational project, and to vote down legislation that sabotaged us internationally, causing us to be blacklisted as a money laundering state. That is what they use their power for. And then in 2015, they assumed the government. And after 5 short years, they emptied the treasury, skyrocketed the national debt, imposed over 200 new taxes on the backs of the people, crippled the productive sectors, drove fear into the business community with the use of SAR and SOKU, destroyed the reputation of highly qualified Guyanese who worked with the previous government by instituting trumped-up charges, caused 30,000 Guyanese to lose their jobs, including 7,000 sugar workers and 2,000 Amerindian CSO workers, seized lands from rice farmers, repeatedly violated the Constitution, being the first country in the world to refuse to hold an election within the prescribed time after being defeated by a no confidence motion, plundered the Treasury and extra budgetary agencies with unauthorized spending, signed the most lopsided oil contract in the history, and swindled 15 million of an 18 million signing bonus, and in the end, shamelessly trying to steal another term in government by attempting to pervert the election results. That is your track record over the last 5 years, and the people of Guyana are very familiar with it. Now in opposition, the honorable members are demonstrating with crystalline clarity to the people of this country that you are too incompetent, too divisive, and too boorish to represent them. The honorable members' behavior in this House has descended to the lowest ebb in our parliamentary history, and they have done it for the world to see. The people have expressed their disgust at the way that you have behaved. And Mr. Speaker, I walked here with the Kaieteur News, just one newspaper I picked up randomly, and the letter columns of Friday the 26th. Speaker fails to do his job, Kit Nascimento. Dishonorable members in the House, Dr. Vishnu Bisram. Disappointed with Tabitha Sarabo Hali presentation, Aditya Bhatt. Parliament shames Guyana, E.B. John. Every single letter in the letter column of last Friday denounced behavior in this House, mostly by your side. Mr. Speaker, Parliament is the highest discussion forum in our constitutional democracy. Members come here not on their own volition to prosecute their own agendas, but they come here to represent the interests of our people. Each of us individually represent the interest of at least 5,000 Guyanese. In the discharge of those responsibilities, we are mandated to carry ourselves with decency and decorum. Mr. Speaker, both in this House as well as in the precincts of this House, the entire compound of this building falls within the precincts of this House. Mr. Speaker, look at this. Look at this, honorable member. Sherrod Duncan in the precincts of this National Assembly. This is what he did. And posted on his Facebook page for all to see. Lying on the floor with his palms open. And this is what he publishes for the world to see. In the precincts of this House. In the precincts of this House. Mr. Speaker, that kind of degenerate vulgarity must be condemned in the strongest possible manner. Mr. Speaker, not having a track record of performance to which honorable members can point, and because of their disgraceful attempt to steal government from March to August, an attempt that has been deprecated by the judiciary, condemned locally and internationally, the honorable members are unable to make a constructive contribution in this National Assembly. So they come here and they hurl personal attacks and invectives, manufacture accomplishments,
Honorable
and worse yet.
I will have to get you to withdraw steal, because I see here thief is a non-parliamentary word too.
What, sorry, sir?
Steal, you said. I have to get you to withdraw that.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I withdraw, no problem. I hope I'm getting back my time, Mr. Speaker. The honorable members come here and they pretend to be representatives of Afro-Guyanese, when all that they have done in government, Mr. Speaker, whichever epoch you wish to examine, is to pauperize the Guyanese, the working people, including Afro-Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, and at this juncture, we have to speak candidly, because that's why we are here, and that's why we are given immunities. Let me make it abundantly clear, Mr. Speaker, that none of the honorable members on that side of the House is more qualified to represent Afro-Guyanese or any grouping of people more than anybody on this side of the House. And I want to make that very clear, Mr. Speaker. This Afrocentric charade of members on that side must be dismantled. Mr. Speaker, I've heard them look at our Honorable Prime Minister, Mark Phillips, with substantive responsibilities, and they label him a mere token. How disrespectful. Where do they get that authority from? To look at the Honorable Member, you, Todd, who is responsible for the foreign relations of our country, and label him a mere token. How can you look at the Honorable Miss Onej Waldron, responsible for industry and commerce and tourism in this country, and label her a mere token? How can you look at the Honorable Member Joe Hamilton, who is responsible for labor relations in our country, and label him a mere token? How can you look at Mr. Ben, the Honorable Member, responsible for our national security, and label him a mere token? Look at Mr. Kwame McCoy, responsible for the entire state media, and you label him a token. Mr. Speaker, this kind of discrimination must stop. And Mr. Ajil, responsible for public infrastructure, perhaps the most important portfolio, and you label him a token. How dare you, Mr. Speaker? This confounded nonsense must stop. It must stop, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, let me examine a few instances in their government to show the duplicity. One of the first things that they did when they got into government, Mr. Speaker, was to accept a letter written by a lawyer on behalf of BK International, and rather than sue that company for breach of a contract at Hagbosh, they paid that company $5.7 million US. Mr. Speaker, let them point to me which Afro community they spent $5.7 million US in one project. Mr. Speaker, a wharf, rather than repossess that wharf for breach of contract, they have gifted it for $20 million to BK Marine. That wharf is valued $8 billion Guyana dollars. Show me through an African community that you have spent $8 million on. $8 billion. So don't come here to pretend to represent Afro-Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, I see they're pretending to represent teachers and public servants. When the teachers and the public servants strike under their government, this is what their minister had to say. Minister Keith Scott, striking teachers are selfish and uncaring. This is what Keith Scott said. Mr. Speaker, when the Amerindians ask for more land, this is what Keith Scott says. Dismisses Amerindian land concerns as greed. This is your record, and you come here to represent people. Mr. Speaker, and the story of the Afro-Guyanese rice farmers of West Coast Berbice tells it all. Mr. Speaker, the Donald Ramotar administration distributed 50-year leases for 10 acres rice land to the people of West Coast Berbice. The first thing that they did when they got into government, one of their first acts, was to instruct the MMA to revoke all those leases and to give it to their cronies. The MMA did that, and I took the matter to the court on behalf of the PPP. All those people, I have no doubt, they are from Seafield Village, they are from Number 40 Village. They may have voted for APNU AFC at the 2015 elections, and their lands are being taken away. And Mr. Speaker, I won the first battle in the court because I was able to establish that MMA can't take lands that have been issued by the president under lease. And rather than accept the ruling of the court and leave the farmers in peace, you know what they did, Mr. Speaker? Those farmers, they took seed paddy in advance from the millers. They took gas, diesel, they took fertilizer. Some of them borrowed money. When those lands were being taken away from them, 51 Afro-Guyanese families would have been put on the breadline. They went to court, they get a court order, and the judge said that only the president can revoke. And you know what the president did? Mr. Speaker, I have it here. In Kaiser News, they published all the names of the farmers. And they said this, notice is hereby given that His Excellency, President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, has cancelled all state leases as described in the schedule. 45 Afro-Guyanese farmers. And today you come here to pretend to represent Afro-Guyanese.
Honorable Minister, as you make all those quotes and those documents, you'll have to lay them, so don't throw them in the garbage.
No, they're here, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Member, Mr. Ford, spoke about the lands and surveys issue and about the lands that we are going after. I want to ask him, and I want to ask those on that side, to point to any Afro-Guyanese village that they have given lands to. Point to the people of Den Amstel. Point to the people of Buxton. Point to the people of Golden Grove, the Bacalus, Victoria, Litchfield, Belladrum. What lands have you given them? But your cronies in Georgetown have gotten thousands of acres of riverside properties and prime commercial properties in Georgetown because they finance your campaign. So don't come here to pretend to represent ordinary people, Mr. Speaker. Yes, finance their personal lives too. I have the evidence, Mr. Speaker. They come here and they speak about the public servants. Mr. Speaker, their own Miss Simona Brooms instructed the Public Service Commission, don't promote public servants. And Sarabo, the Honorable Member Sarabo, I have another one of these beautiful pictures where she dismissed the Honorable Member. She felt she had a power to dismiss public servants. Public servants she dismissed, and the President had to reinstate them by a commission. Mr. Speaker, they speak about bauxite workers. They're quoting liberally from Mr. Lincoln Lewis. This is what Lincoln Lewis said about them and bauxite workers. Bauxite workers feel abandoned by government, says trade union leader. I have it all here. All of this are in the records, Mr. Speaker. And they come here to pretend to represent public officers. And Mr. Speaker, the best one I kept for last, the Honorable Coretta MacDonald. She came here and spoke glowingly for teachers. And Mr. Speaker, this is what she said, September the 4th, 2018, Guyana Times. Look at here, Mr. Speaker, a beautiful photograph. I love her hairstyle. I love her hairstyle. Teachers got more under the PPP government, says GTU President. This is what she said. And Mr. Speaker, let me quote from her. The Honorable Member is quite articulate. If we look at what transpired under the PPP government when they were in power and what is transpiring now, remember we didn't want the 5%. We made noise about it, but with the 5%, we got a whole lot of non-salary benefits, she said loudly, to applause from a large gathering of teachers. She continued, for the first time in the history of this country, our teachers were able to get clothing allowance, duty-free concessions, and allowance for additional qualifications. Mr. Speaker, we still have space for her on this side. At least I think her mind is in the right direction, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I believe that I have given sufficient examples to dismantle their mantra about representing poor people and working people of this country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in fact, because of their performance, if they are to go to an elections tomorrow, Mr. Speaker, if they are going to go to an elections tomorrow, they will lose a minimum of 10 seats. They will lose a minimum of 10 seats. Mr. Speaker, as have been repeatedly stated, this budget represents 1/5 of our developmental plan to transform Guyana. As we have said repeatedly, this budget lays the foundation upon which the edifice of modern Guyana will be constructed. My colleagues have done an exemplary job in outlining in their presentations the various projects contained in the budget. There is no need for me to repeat them. Mr. Speaker, of equal importance to what are in the budget is what are not in the budget. The budget creates an environment that is conducive. For example, Mr. Speaker, the budget provides for the construction of a hospitality training institute that will train 2,000 Guyanese per year. That is to create a regiment of staff who would service our hotel industry. Mr. Speaker, a Sheraton, a Delta Marriott, a Sure Stay, a Best Western, a Hyatt Tower, a Radisson, a Hilton, and a Mammoth 1,000-room hotel with elevated car park are just some of the major hotels that are coming here. These projects will bring to Guyana millions of US dollars in direct foreign investment and will create jobs for thousands. Mr. Speaker, none of these budgets are in the budget. Similarly, the Gas to Shore project will result in a reduction in cost of electricity by 50%, which will awake Guyana's sleeping giant, the agro-manufacturing sector. The construction of a deep water harbor at the mouth of Berbice River, the Del Conte Highway from Parica to Bartica, the new highway from Parica to Demerara Harbor Bridge, the Letham to Linden, the Ogle to Diamond Road Link, the Mandel Avenue to Echo Bypass will cumulatively make available tens of thousands of acres of prime land for development opportunities, while stimulating commerce and trade in a manner never seen before. These projects will be financed by loans, but now backed by an economy that will be in receipt of an unprecedented revenue flow from oil production. No doubt, Mr. Speaker, over the next 5 years, Guyana will be charting its course to becoming the leading investment destination in the Western Hemisphere. Mr. Speaker, it is in this developmental equation that the Legal Affairs Ministry will have to play a crucial role. Our major focus will be the creation of a modern legal infrastructure that will regulate these new and emerging sectors, while at the same time revamp our archaic laws to complete a new and modern legal framework for Guyana. So every conceivable area of economic activity will be targeted for legal reforms. An international consultant will be retained to draft a compendium of legislation for the oil and gas sector. In the housing and hospitality sector, we will have a whole new regime of legislation dealing with zoning, urban planning, condominiums, townhouses. In the health sector, we have identified approximately 25 pieces of legislation we will work on, including new Public Health Act, a new Mental Health Act, organ transplant legislation, a new Food and Drug Act, and many more. In the agri-sector, we will be enacting a food safety bill and a food security act and other pieces of legislation that will ready Guyana to export agricultural products. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the hire purchase bill, which is in the select committee, we have an anti-dumping bill, a movable property security bill, and an e-transaction bill, which are currently in draft. This latter bill is to prepare the public sector to engage in e-transactions for payment to be made for government services by means other than cash and check. At the level of the local government, the Solid Waste Management Bill will soon be completed and public consultations will be held in relation thereto. From a defense point of view, in order to strengthen our ability to protect our borders, a bill is being drafted for the establishment of a border patrol unit, which will supplement the Guyana Police Force and the Guyana Defense Force in securing and protecting our borders. Mr. Speaker, similarly, in the legal sector, a raft of legislation will be promulgated, including a new arbitration bill, a new juvenile justice bill, a bail bill, sentencing guidelines, and of course, a slew of amendments will be done to our election laws to make the electoral process more credible and transparent, and to hold the staff of the Guyana Elections Commission to a higher standard of care. Mr. Speaker, the Constitutional Reform Committee of the National Assembly will begin its work, and that committee will remain the main vehicle by which these reforms will be driven. This year will also see the beginning of the program that will install holders of a Bachelor of Laws degree into the state prosecutorial program. These persons will work with police prosecutors in our magistrates court right across the length and breadth of Guyana. Significantly, the Legal Affairs Ministry will be reviewing the Procurement Act not only to strengthen the public procurement process, but to create a more level playing field in order to accommodate small contractors. Within a few months, the Judicial Service Commission will be up and running. The Committee of Appointments have already provided their nominees. We are also working on a new and modern public service rules which will further protect the interests of public servants. As we continue to modernize the public sector architecture, massive reforms are taking place at the deeds and commercial and land registry, where documents are being digitized and the requisite platforms are being built to facilitate e-transactions, including e-payments. This year will also see the appointment of the Law Reform Commission, whose first task will be to revise the current laws of Guyana and to produce a new consolidated volume of those laws. We are also working with the Director of Public Prosecution, the police force, the Guyana Prison Service, and the judiciary to create a joint management information system to better and more effectively manage criminal litigation. The DPP office is earmarked for physical expansion, and hopefully we will get budget for a new building, as the DPP office requires serious physical as well as human resource expansion. New magistrates court building with living quarters and supporting facilities will be constructed at Port Kaituma, Mabaruma, Vigilance, and the Lower East Bank Demerara. Mr. Speaker, a total of 4.6 billion has been allocated for the legal and justice sector. We have already expended over $1 million in the construction, installation, and functioning of 32 containerized virtual courtrooms located at Lusignan, Mazaruni, Timeri, and New Amsterdam, whereby prisoners who are in custody at these prison centers can have their cases heard in these courts, obviating the need to transport them across the country to various locations.
And you
Not
will need
only
more time, Honorable Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, 5 minutes for honorable member.
Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister. Honorable Attorney General,
Thank you, Mr.
you may
Speaker.
continue to conclude.
not only protecting the prisoners, magistrates, and court personnel from unnecessary exposure in this COVID-19 pandemic, but at the same time, it saves millions of dollars of taxpayers' dollars, which would have had to have been spent in transporting these prisoners to various courtrooms, including in the far-flung areas. This year will also see the completion of massive physical expansion to the main building of the Ministry of Legal Affairs, which will create much-needed space to accommodate more personnel who are required to meet the expanding role of the Attorney General Chambers in the coming years. The Attorney General Office will continue its review of state land giveaway under the previous administration, and where necessary, will take the requisite steps to restore these lands to the ownership of the state. Mr. Speaker, the Attorney General Office will continue to vigilantly monitor the performance of contractors executing government contracts to ensure that these contracts are satisfactorily performed and completed within the scheduled time. Mr. Speaker, this budget represents one installment of a 5-year program which we took to the people during the elections campaign of March 2020. By their ballots, the people have endorsed our plan, and by extension, they have endorsed this budget. Significantly, this budget has also received the endorsement of very important stakeholder organizations in the developmental agenda of this country, including the Private Sector Commission, the Guyana Manufacturing Association, the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce, the Barbies and the Quarantine Chamber of Commerce, the largest trade union movement in Guyana, FITAG, and the American Chamber of Commerce, and all the political parties in Guyana. So, Mr. Speaker, if the 31 harbingers of doom in this House do not support it, the people and the country will lose nothing. The ship of Guyana will sail without them, and they will continue to be an irrelevant, incompetent bunch. Mr. Speaker, with those few remarks, I commend this budget to this honorable House. I thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Honorable members, I have been informed that the next speaker, His Excellency, the Honorable Member Dr. Bharat Jagdeo, will not be making a presentation. I now would like to call on the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Joseph Harmon, to make the Honorable Member will be making his contribution from virtually. Honorable members, could we take a 5-minute
We are a
suspension? I need
peaceful
to make a
people.
urgent
Struggle is we
call.
struggle, and we don't look for trouble. Just ask around. But when outside faces from foreign places talk about taking over, we ain't backing down. We ain't giving up no more.